Morning. I'm Mitch Shults, the state chair of the Libertarian Party of Oregon. Thanks for coming to our press conference. I have a few comments to start, and then we'll hear from others in the room. Is Jason Williams going to be here?
He said he would. Haven't seen him yet. Senator George is sick. He's got the flu. He's in Newburgh.
Got it. Okay. Well, hopefully he'll show up in time. I have a few prepared comments, and then we'll hear from Richard and Tom Cox on some additional details. In nature, geometric increases in anything always fail. Think of lemmings jumping off the cliff into the sea. In government, the same law holds true. It's simply impossible to increase spending beyond the growth rate of the underlying economy forever. Oregon now faces the reality of that law. The goose has stopped laying the golden eggs, and no amount of flogging will make her start laying again. We now face a gap between planned spending and anticipated tax revenues of approximately 3%. That's 3% of a budget that has grown by more than 100% over the last 12 years, far in excess of population growth or need, supported by regular tax increases and extraordinary returns from an absurdly high capital gains tax. To hear the entrenched political class of Oregon tell the tale, the entire ship is sinking and the sky is falling to boot. Their argument is ridiculous. And what's more, it's cynical and brutish. If the only thing our leaders can come up with to address a minor shortfall is to lay off half of the state police, set 4,000 felons loose on the streets, cut off medicines to the desperately ill, and shorten the school year even further, then they should be replaced. They're perpetrating a fraud against the people of Oregon, hoping to scare them into giving up still more of their hard-earned income to the voracious maw of the spending class and their pet special interests. This time, scare tactics won't work. The people of Oregon have seen it too many times before. They know the spending class is lying. They know there must be a better way. For more than 30 years, the Libertarian Party of Oregon has been advocating that better way. Simply stated, the better way is to completely eliminate, not just reduce, government programs that have no legitimate reason to exist at all. The better way is to create private incentives, such as medical savings accounts and other methods, instead of creating ever larger bureaucracies in Salem. And the better way is to continually reduce taxes in order to greatly expand economic growth and eliminate poverty forever. In the last 6 years, especially, the Libertarian Party has clearly demonstrated that we are the only political party in Oregon whose candidates, all of them, can be relied upon to always act to reduce government and reduce taxation. All the time, every time, no exceptions and no excuses. In your press packet is a one-page summary of the specific history of the Libertarian Party's efforts in this regard. I'll hit a few high points. In his 1998 campaign for governor, Richard was the only candidate to release a detailed, specific proposed state budget that would have significantly reduced state spending and lowered taxes on all Oregonians. In my 2000 campaign for treasurer, I did the same. I also predicted the difficulties that the Oregon Republic retirement system would face if it wasn't completely reformed. $9.2 billion in unfunded liabilities later, I'm being proven right. In last year's gubernatorial race, Tom Cox, the Libertarian Party candidate, was alone in his enthusiasm to release a detailed budget during the campaign that would have turned our impending deficit into a surplus and a tax cut. Perhaps most significantly, in 2002, the Libertarian Party made good on its tough love strategy of running candidates in opposition to vulnerable Republicans who were supporters of increasing taxes. Bill Witt, the primary sponsor of Measure 28, might have been on his way to the Senate today if it hadn't been for the Libertarian Party's Skip Witt campaign. 5 of the 6 other candidates we opposed suffered the same fate. Now the Libertarian Party is turning its attention to ensuring that the voters of Oregon are informed of the reality of Measure 28, so that they can ignore the lies being told by the spending class and turn the measure down decisively. Just as Oregon doesn't need a sales tax, it doesn't need more income taxes either. What we need is less government. We're calling this the Turn the Tide campaign because we believe that the tide has been going out on Oregon's economic viability over the last 12 years. The current crisis is in reality an opportunity to finally remove the burden of taxation and excessive regulation that has made Oregon a national and international pariah to investors. Unless Oregon turns that tide by rejecting Measure 28 and any others like it, we will be mired in recession for the foreseeable future, longer than the rest of the country. Richard Burke, now the executive director of the Libertarian Party of Oregon, he also happens to be the elected president of the Tualatin Valley Water District, but he's speaking in his Libertarian Party capacity today, will now describe how the party, in combination with the Taxpayer Association of Oregon and other supporters, will be taking our Turn the Tide campaign to the people of Oregon. He'll be followed, I hope, by Jason Williams, the executive director of the Taxpayer Association of Oregon, who will speak to that group's efforts. And Tom Cox will provide some details regarding his budget suggestions and top 10 list drawn from his experience in the gubernatorial campaign. And the conclusion will all be available to take your questions. Richard?
Thank you, Mitch. I know time is valuable to you all, so I'll be as brief as possible here. I think that Mitch, by touching on some of the things we did in the last election cycle, confirmed that the last legislative cycle was one characterized by conflict and confrontation, whether it was R's and D's, Libertarians and Republicans, or Governor Kitzhaber and everyone. That was what it was. But this provides us an opportunity to work together toward changing the environment in Oregon overall. Libertarians now are interested in forming coalitions. You know, we've taken some hits by fighting with our Republican friends, but there are some real Republican heroes out there. They include folks like Representative Knope, Senator George, Senator now Representative Randy Miller, who have all held the line on taxes, and even some Democrats like May Yee. And we're very encouraged by some of the things that Governor-elect Kolongoski has been saying, specifically that he will not back tax increases, that he's in favor of looking at zero-based budgeting, and that he wants real PERS reform. If he follows through on these statements, then we have an environment to not clash heads, but to work together to get a handle on state spending and to create an environment that encourages the kind of investment that creates jobs and capital wealth in this state. So the environment is right. We've got to get a handle on runaway state spending. Legislators and I think talk show hosts are supporting ideas we have backed for years. These ideas have included things like privatizing the Oregon Liquor Commission, rolling back or eliminating the ineffective Department of Economic Development. But before any of this can happen, Ballot Measure 28 must first be defeated before anyone can take advantage of this environment. If it passes, it'll send a signal that taxes are good, bigger government is good, and as we have seen, that it's consistently been, the road to less wealth and more strife. I think Oregonians recognize that state spending is out of control. I think that defeating it will send a message to legislators that tax increases will not be tolerated. Voting no on Measure 28 will send a message that Oregonians collectively acknowledge that in a recession, they need all the money they can earn to help their kids and to meet their daily needs. And defeating Measure 28 would send a message to investors that we're not going to tax them out of existence. We're not going to accelerate the rate of corporate flight in this state. So today we're launching the Turn the Tide campaign. And it's called Turn the Tide for several reasons. Mitch alluded to one. We can turn the tide on runaway state spending, and we can start looking at reductions in the size of government. We can begin to transform Oregon from an investment-hostile place to an investment-friendly one. And as Tom had pointed out, it harkens back to John Kennedy, who said that tax cuts create wealth, and that a rising tide raises all boats. So there are various elements to this campaign. The central feature will be a 27-city road tour that we're going to be embarking on. This will include television, radio, and newspaper interviews. Myself, Mitch, and Tom are all going to hit the road during the next 3 weeks, where we just go to the small towns and the big cities, get on the talk show hosts, talk with editorial boards, and outline the reasons why Ballot Measure 28 is a bad idea. We're also holding town hall meetings in places like Ashland, Ontario, Eugene, and other places where we have strong county organizations, and we can call town meetings to, again, point out the reasons why we don't need Measure 28 and what alternatives are available. There are various speaking events. For example, I'm going to be talking in front of the Prineville Kiwanis Club in a couple of days, and other speaking events are going to help us spread that message. We're also doing cable television broadcasts. We're going to do TV shows that will be distributed on public access shows all over the state. And we're going to mobilize all of our 19 county affiliate organizations to write letters to the editor, call into talk show hosts, and talk to their neighbors and do everything they can to create opposition to this. Finally, we formed a new PAC. The PAC is called Turn the Tide Against Measure 28, and this will be a place where we will raise money for a paid media campaign from people who want to support what we're doing but don't want to make donations to the Libertarian Party. Perhaps they belong to another party. So, in conclusion of my section of this is our issue. We've been fighting this for years. We've been predicting this problem, and we've been fighting these tax issues. So we feel a real investment, both intellectually and emotionally, in defeating Measure 28. But it's not just enough to say no. If you're going to say no on taxes when there is a problem, you have a responsibility to provide solutions. And we followed through on that and done our best to do so. And so at this point, I'd like to introduce Tom Cox, who has some alternatives to raising taxes.
Thank you. Some of the words we've been hearing applied to Measure 28 are words like shakedown and extortion. These are not words that have come from me, but from articles in the press, quotes from average taxpayers and average voters. We are facing a crisis of confidence in our elected officials, in the agencies and departments in state government. People don't feel that they are getting value for money, and when they hear that a 3% cut in the general fund requires us to shut down nearly every important aspect of state government, they don't buy it. And they shouldn't buy it. One of the common excuses offered for the increase in state spending over the last 12 years, the fact that the state spending has in fact doubled in the last 12 years, it's been Measure 5. It's all because of Measure 5, right? Wrong. Measure 5 would certainly explain the increased share in K through 12 spending at the state level. Measure 5 does not explain away the nearly 40% increase in the Department of Human Services over the last 4 years. It does not explain away the 70% increase in spending in consumer and business services in the last 4 years. It does not begin to explain why the administration department general fund allocation should be up 30% over 4 years, or why the legislative branch should have increased its share of the general fund by 41% over 4 years. No, the Measure 5 excuse will not cut it. And we have got, as taxpayers and as voters, to stand up to the shakedown. We are simply going to have to vote no on Measure 28 and defy those who insist that the only possible response to the failure of Measure 28 would be to release prisoners, to let police go, to shorten the K through 12 school year. Absolutely not acceptable. And as part of offering a positive vision for how to handle this, we have come up with, among other things, a top 10 list of cuts that can be made that will not come from public safety and will not shorten the school year. Now, these are in your press pack. You don't need me to read them to you. But I think that the underlying message here is and ought to be that the citizens of this state need to reestablish trust with the governing class of this state, and the way to do it is for our governing class to accept the fact that we've got a state government that's simply too big, that too much money is going to the wrong places, and that we have not once in 12 years revisited any of these spending items to ask, are they necessary, and are they being done in the most efficient way possible? And those two questions should be asked of every single line item in the budget. Are they necessary, and are they being done efficiently? These are not hard questions. If we are facing a budget crisis, why are we attempting to expand the empire of human services to visit every single newborn in the state, 99% of whom don't need anything from the state? That is empire building. I could go on, but you get the idea. One of the tests of whether or not our legislature is serious about cutting costs is whether or not they will privatize the Oregon Liquor Control Commission and get Oregon out of the 1930s. We should not be running a state-owned liquor wholesale monopoly. That will save us $80 million out of the biennial budget, and people will say, well, that's only $80 million. I'm sorry, if you scoff at $80 million, well, that's a symptom of this problem. You can't be bothered to count the pennies. Pretty soon it all adds up. Ladies and gentlemen, we can do so much better than this, but it will not happen until the voters and the taxpayers demand that the state do better. And my party is here to show you that better is possible. We've got a list of what better looks like. We are more than willing to work with every other party in this state, with any politician of any stripe, to come up with positive suggestions of how we can make this work without raising taxes, without driving yet more businesses out of this state. And the key to this is to vote no on Measure 28. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Hey, Tom, where did these numbers come from?
I think we've got an extra copy of them. I've been working off of what I get from the Legislative Fiscal Office and the Legislative, not fiscal, what's the other one? Revenue Office. No, Legislative Fiscal Office is the spending side. If you look at budget highlights for 0103, they've got numbers going back to the 97-99 biennium. If you just do a straight comparison, you'll get the difference in numbers. Oh, that is, the magic formula is 5 over 24. Okay. 5 months out of 24, right? So you take the column 1, you multiply by 5 over 24, you get column 2, hopefully. Okay. And if I screwed up the math, you can slap me.
Well, I just, like the motor pool, I hadn't seen an official number on that, but that's just, you took the 10 million budget, or whatever the motor pool is, and assumed we wouldn't spend any money on cars.
Well, I'm assuming we're going to privatize management of it. Okay. And that the $10 million savings, that is the net savings from the biennial budget on privatizing.
Obviously, would still need cars from somewhere.
Absolutely right.
Is that included in that number?
Yeah, that's supposed to be, yes.
Richard, you talked about the forming a PAC and some fundraising. Are you contemplating some TV? I mean, the ballots go out on Friday.
Well, ballots do go out on Friday, but people often wait to the end to vote, and this is a special election, so awareness is not as high. So we're anticipating that a lot of ballots will come late. And so,
are you going to be up on the air at some point with TV?
Well, we raise the money, we will be, and I think that we'll have to be. I think it's a strategy of the government class to keep this as low profile as they can. They've raised money that they're putting into grassroots, but they don't want to do a lot of TV. They don't want to do a lot of radio unless they're on a friendly venue. And I think that's smart. If I were in their shoes, I wouldn't want to trigger money that would trigger the fiscal conservative money. So what we're hoping is that by being visible and being out the state, we can start that escalation process, which will create the awareness. Maybe somebody will help us put the TV ads on the air. Maybe what we're doing will cause somebody to respond, and it'll cause somebody else to put the ads on the air. But either way, we want to trigger that, I guess, advertising, which will create the awareness, which will increase voter turnout, which we think works in our favor.
Is this the Libertarian PAC, or is it just basically generic no on?
It's a generic no on PAC. If any ads we raise money for in this PAC will not say Libertarian Party, it'll say vote no on Measure 28.
Is there enough of a private sector left in Oregon to defeat Measure 28? In talking to people, I've noticed that the private sector is opposed, while those who have families in the public sector working for government are in favor.
Absolutely.
And for
Yeah.
the last 50 years, as long as any of us have been alive, the government has been destroying the private sector.
Well, absolutely. There's plenty. We think we're confident that we can win this fight.
As long as they get out and vote. If they don't mark their ballots, then their opinion doesn't count. And the support side is guaranteed to do a very effective job of getting out the vote.
That's correct.
So we're here to fight that. the rest of Oregon needs to be heard on this issue.
And we think that this gives us an opportunity. We've been working hard to propose budgets for a long time, but people have been telling us, no, that's too radical, that's too aggressive, it's too new, it'll be hard to sell. But we think the time is right now with the budget shortfall that exists. If we are able to beat Measure 28, then the environment will exist where people will be forced to look at these ideas. They'll look at them anew, and some of them may be implemented in full or in part. And most of the ideas we have are ideas that will not throw elderly people on the street. If we privatize motor pool management, how many old people does that throw on the street? If we privatize OLCC liquor distribution, how many school days does that eliminate from the calendar? The answer, of course, is none. You know, there are a lot of these kind of things that can be done, need to be done, and I think the political courage to do it has been lacking. So we have to create the political environment which will make nothing else possible. And then we will get the sort of cuts we need to make state government more efficient and leaner, and perhaps close the crisis of confidence that Tom was talking about.
That's what you're saying. The top 10 items here would negate any need to do some of the more extreme things like troopers, prison closings,
You'll see
short school years.
What we've come up
That's your
with is,
basic
in
point,
fact,
you know.
we've got over $500 million in savings that can be enacted in the current budget year by the legislature. That would save us, that's what, $200 million more than we need to close the budget gap. That's $200 million we can throw into K through 12.
Is there a practicality problem? Well, if you're talking about a wage reduction for public employees, I mean, that would be a contract issue that would immediately be thrown into court. So
That would be difficult, it would be challenging, it would require leadership. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
If we lose that one, that's $41 million we don't get. Okay, so now we're down to $160 million more than we need.
No, I mean, you could go through it and have foibles with these things.
Some of these are
you know,
easier than others, some of them are
like
bigger than
healthcare
others.
management, you're going to create unemployment expenses that
Sure.
save all the money, et cetera. But
Well, but you
more
know,
to stimulate. I mean, these numbers are more to stimulate the conversation as opposed to
No.
being the exact.
I would be surprised if these went through the legislature exactly as described here, but they show that these things can be done. We know that middle management is bloated in state government. We know that of the, 40-some thousand state employees, we've got a surprisingly large number of middle management. The people who are line workers, the people who actually do the day-to-day functions of government are, by and large, competent professionals who do important work.
let me interject.
But then there's all the pointy-haired bosses that you see.
They don't need quite so much help.
There's also a cycle that we actually spoke about a couple of days ago, where when we bring up these ideas during the regular session, they say, no, these are not practical ideas. But then when we have budget crises and we go into special sessions, the tune then changes. They say, well, these are great ideas, but we don't have time to implement them. Okay? And so then it doesn't get done. Then we go into the next regular session where they once again say that they're not reasonable ideas, spend more money, create a new budget crisis, and then once again, they're great ideas, but we don't have time. At some point, you have to end that cycle and you have to draw that line. And what we're saying is we've got to draw that line here. Making these decisions will be politically difficult, but if this environment doesn't make it possible to do them, then nothing will. Because we've seen that when there's a lot of time to talk about things and when there is a lot of money around, they won't do it. Senator Gordon Smith said when he was here that if you give us money, we will spend it. And they have shown this to be true time and time again. So if we want this to stop and we want to see businesses come back to Oregon and we want the recession to end, this has to end, and it has to end here. It's going to be politically difficult, but that's it. We've used up all our grace time. We've got to act now.
The thought of a hanging tomorrow concentrates the mind wonderfully.
Right.
And this can be done. In fact, if you look at other states, we find numerous examples that ought to give us a lot of hope. The mayor of Indianapolis was able to significantly reduce his city's spending while improving the quality and quantity of services delivered. The progressive governor of Wisconsin, Tommy Thompson, was able to increase the quality of state services while decreasing costs. The outgoing governor of New Mexico was able to do a number of things that reformed New Mexico government and reduce the tax burden. One of the things that makes Oregon stand out of all 50 states is that the recession has hit us harder than practically anybody else. when you read in the national press about how this has been such a shallow recession. I mean, you look around Oregon, you're like, what shallow recession? Excuse me, this has been a terrible recession for us. And then you look at some of the other states like Colorado who sailed through with hardly a blip. Now Oregon's special because we had a lot of high tech, right? Well, Colorado's special, they had a lot of telecom, and telecom got hammered. So why isn't Colorado suffering the way we are? Because they controlled taxes and they controlled state spending and they kept the size of their government small. These things can be done. We are the second highest state in terms of how much we spend on prisoners. That means that there's 48 states out there whose brains we could pick on how to cut our prison costs. So let's visit some of them. Let's write letters, make phone, let's find out how it is we can cut our prison costs. $37,000 per prisoner per year is a lot of money to spend on prison.
That's one of the things New Mexico did especially effectively.
There is hope. There are choices. There are options. We do not have to drive more businesses out of this state. That's our message. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.